Hi, I'm Stephen Carson coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. A couple points of order. A group I'm very heavily involved with, leading, in fact, technically, called the Old Glory Club, is kicked off this week. Some articles on a Substack in preparation for our big launch day on November 7th, which will consist of a number of videos and streams throughout the day before the midterms here in the United States. And already there's some great stuff. Take a look at an article by Charlemagne and Paul Fahrenheit. I'll put a link in the chat in a minute, at our Substack. And even all of that is just really preparation for something else coming in the future, or more coming in the future. So cool stuff. Would love to have all of you involved. All right. This show is supported by a Subscribe Star. I am very grateful for the support I get from folks there. Most people just chip in $5 a month to support the show, and it is very helpful. Okay. With that, let's bring on Ryan Turnipseed. Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you doing?
Pretty good. You were talking about, you were kind of like, I can do the show earlier. I don't really want to go to this class. So did you go, and were you bored?
I went to class and we covered the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and the Dodd-Frank Act, and that was it. It was all financial regulation, corporate governance, Enron scandal. Kind of knew most of it from the
Oh, you
finance
did?
class I had to take last semester.
Oh,
So,
okay. I see. So it wasn't, I thought you were just bored by the topic. You're just saying you know this stuff already.
well, I mean, yeah, yeah, I'm not exactly bored easily by legislation and laws. That's kind of how I get into a lot of historical topics that I know. It's just more
Hmm.
the repetition of the talking points that I start to get bored by.
Right, right. Um, you mean the spin by the professors?
Well, no, it's
Oh,
just
oh,
like
okay.
Sarbanes-Oxley Act, auditing independence, accounting,
Hmm.
transparency, and all this other stuff. I've heard
Yeah,
it
yeah.
4 million times. I'm
Got it.
a little bit bored. I kind of want more substance if we're going to go over it, but
Right.
if it makes for an easy exam at the very least.
uh, okay, so we're going to get right into it because we've got about 1 hour to cover this topic. Fortunately, um, this is basically, well, I don't know how much context you're going to give us, but this is basically 1 year that is the main focus of the story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 1 year in one region of Germany. So we're going to be laser like focused today. In fact, I don't mind that because, as I was saying to Ryan, I don't think the left wing terror series, in my mind, is meant to comprehensively cover all left wing terror that's ever happened because it would go on forever. I mean, there's Cambodia
Yeah.
and there's, just on and on and on.
We need a lot more storage than YouTube allows if we were going to cover that much.
Right, right. What I'm more interested in with this series is highlighting some episodes that you might not have heard of. I, for one, didn't know anything about Red Bavaria, and I'm going to learn while Ryan teaches us today. Some of these things I knew about, some of these things I didn't, and that's what's great fun about having some co-hosts. Sometimes, a lot of times on this channel, it's been about here's something I know about and I want to share it with you. But with the Left Wing Terror series, I know about some of this. I would like to know about more of it, and I have people to help me. So, Panama Hat joined us for the Spanish Civil War, and then Ryan's helping us with most of this. So, and we might hunt up other people depending on what episode of history we're focused on. Okay,
Right.
so let's go to the slides here. All right.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
slide
just
one.
something that something I should preface this with. We have academic agents rule of if you're going to use a book for history, find one before 1945.
Mm-hmm.
That presents an issue for this topic because at the year 1945, this would have been about 25 years old. It'd be the
Yeah,
equivalent.
25 years after this event. Yeah.
Yeah, so like that'd be the equivalent of someone writing a comprehensive history of something that happened in like the very late 90s, maybe even the early 2000s. Like that's it's not feasible to find the based right winger book on Red Bavaria.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured I should just be upfront here. I have sifted through it's a mainstream book. It's not paused or anything. Like by all means, it admits some very uncomfortable truths. For some people, like at the outset, it basically just says there's an extreme Jewish overrepresentation in Bolshevik parties, and
Mm-hmm.
it proceeds
Right.
to list basically all of them from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. So it's by no means is it like I went to some lefty book,
Right.
but the full title of the book that I'm working from, just for full disclosure, is called "The Third Reich: A New History,"
Mm.
which yeah, reason I did this is because I had a week to prepare. It has a very sort of snappy overview of what happened in Bavaria, and there's maybe 4 books that actually discuss this topic. So that's what we're working with, and
Yeah.
it has some very good quotes about sort of the lunacy and the maliciousness of the elements we're dealing with.
Yeah. I mean,
So if we want to
Ryan, that
go,
there may be a reason that we have 6 gazillion books on World War II and
yeah,
four books on Red Bavaria. You know,
yeah,
and it's not
well,
only because, admittedly, World War II was a much, by any measure, it was a much more significant event, and it had
and
such a
longer,
huge impact,
yeah,
and longer, right? But still, it seems to me that even if we did more of an apples to apples comparison, you know,
right,
a year of the right wing being in charge somewhere is probably going to be covered more, uh,
right, yeah.
right? Because they want to highlight,
So
you know, how terrible that was, right?
right, exactly. Yeah, look at how evil and malicious these dirty right wingers were. They instituted laws from 20 years ago instead of 5 years ago. It's
Right,
terrifying.
right.
So, uh,
Well said.
with the with the next few slides that we have, I figured I would provide very brief context because we're not doing a World War One history stream. I'm going to provide the bare minimum just to tell
Yeah.
you what it's like in Germany in the year 1917 through 1919. So
Slide
this
two.
second slide, yes,
Okay.
should be a
Let's.
colored cartoon.
Yep.
Uh, Originally Dutch. You can see there is a German infantryman, has the old-fashioned helmet with the cover on it still, talking to farmers. This is depicting the black market in the war.
Hmm.
The Netherlands, quite famously in World War One, were neutral. They were not invaded. The German war plan changed to exclude an invasion of the Netherlands, so they stayed out of the war. Uh, this meant that the Dutch farmers basically had free reign to selling to most of Europe because they weren't destroyed, they weren't being profiteered, they weren't being nationalized, their farmers weren't being conscripted. So there was a great black market from Dutch farmers to starving Germans. That's what this cartoon is depicting. I believe the full title is like the smuggling of foodstuffs or something like that, whatever that would be in Dutch. So that's the that's sort of the context here. War measures in Germany were not popular. They were very strict. People were not quite starving, but you might as well have been. They were being given just enough to keep the war machine going. Is typically how the story goes. The excerpt from the book, just a very quick paragraph to show you why this matters. It says the burgeoning black market undermined conventional notions of honesty, of due rewards for a hard day's labor, and of who had the most right to a certain good. The corollary was a reemergence of a quasi medieval notion of the just price, with profiteers standing in for medieval usurers in wartime folklore. Farmers sought to circumvent state controls through illicit slaughtering and the black market. Starving urban consumers descended onto the fields to forage for food and sometimes ransacked food supply trains. Farmers who had taken in millions of evacuated urban children unsurprisingly resented these further incursions. What amounted to governmental affirmative action for urban consumers led to stringent bureaucratic controls and a regime of inspection for producers, not to mention such base practices as denunciation of those trying to turn a dishonest penny. So, already, due to the rationings and all this other stuff, you have resentment being built from people in the rural farmlands to the people in the urban centers. There's further conflict here that already existed. The farmlands tended to be much more conservative. The urban centers tended to be social democratic, sometimes atheistic. So that already existed. Farmers were basically housing them, putting them to work if they were impoverished, providing food for them. The government had a sort of inspection regime. You had it's German bureaucracy you're dealing with here. So, um, not really going that well. And then the state starts to crack down on the black market, which was already trying to alleviate some of the starvation and the shortages brought about by the war. So, this is most of Germany. It's not just places near the Netherlands. This is you know, anywhere near a border, anywhere by supply trains. This is happening. So already you see social bonds are starting to dissolve due to the war.
Yeah, just to mention real quick, this thing of not understanding that, the prices are high because of shortages, not necessarily because people are just greedy people or something.
Yeah,
It's the price system indicating where the need is most desperate, right?
right.
And so I'm doing this off the top of my head, but there's a book at the Mises Institute called 40 Centuries of Price and Wage Controls or something like that, that goes through, the Roman Empire and all kinds of different episodes of governments misunderstanding what's happening, right? We just
Right.
need to come down on the profiteers, these greedy people, and then that'll fix it. And meanwhile, it causes more starvation and more misery because it's not letting the price system do its work of telling people what's needed where.
Right. And if you go to the next slide, you can kind of
Oh,
see
yeah.
that visualized.
Okay.
So this is a
I'm sorry.
basically
Slide
a
slide three.
yes.
Oh, okay.
So
Go ahead.
this map
Yeah.
is all the countries that were on or that were in famine during World War One, approaching famine,
Oh,
on the track to famine, or just rationing mostly fine. There wasn't concern for food. So the places in the darkest orange: Romania, Serbia, Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, and Belgium and Luxembourg. Those places had famously quite a brutal famine during World War One.
sure.
Uh, you can see the places in yellow: Germany, France, Turkey. I don't know if I fully agree with this map. I think you can probably include other places in the Balkans besides that part of Turkey. But these are the places that usually get touted as a very near famine. So Germany, quite famously in 1917, had an episode called the Turnip Winter, where the only foods being able to ration to the population were turnips. It was basically considered a famine, despite the fact there was still food. It was all
Hmm.
turnip, uh, hilariously.
Right.
France, uh, France had a war plan of being more well off than its enemies. That started to hit a wall basically towards the end of the war. You started to have mutinies because resources were running thin. Farms were being absolutely devastated in
Hmm.
some of their more productive regions. And you also had you know, there was a there was a lot of sabotage happening as well.
Hmm.
The Ottomans are a different story, not relevant to this. The places in just orange, most of Russia, Austria, Italy, at least according to this map, were on track to famine. Italy, Austria, and those parts of Russia were not under conditions that you would have found in Poland, Belgium, the front lines in Germany and France, or even the civilian conditions. Things were bad, but they did not have a sort of analog to the most stringent forms of rationing that you saw. Part of this in Russia was due to the fact you saw the feudal system kind of in place. So, at the very least, most people were used to self sufficiency. There wasn't a breakdown in supply chains because that wasn't there really. And then the places in blue were either rationing and fine or were neutral and thus didn't have to worry about famine conditions. So the UK and its navy imposed that Churchill quite famously imposed a blockade on Germany, which is why Germany's in yellow. The UK could supply itself fine. Germany had to resort to U-boats, but that didn't really cause too much of a panic. Spain was neutral, wasn't quite a famine worry. Switzerland, the Netherlands, neutral. Scandinavia, just fine. So this is just the state of things. Germany was not really well off. Most of its neighbors weren't well off. When the war ends, you can't really just magic food into existence. So there's going to be a bit of a lag trying to get things back to normal. This map is here to illustrate it. Things weren't good. You went from a pre-war environment where few, if any, European countries were facing famine to the vast majority of the continent potentially under those conditions. So that's whenever the war ends, it's not just going to go back to peacetime for at least a couple of years. And then with the next slide, slide 4, we have sort of the currency situation of the German mark.
There we go. It's up now. Yeah, go ahead.
All righty. So everyone knows, again, jokes about Weimar hyperinflation and all this other stuff. That starts to happen in 1923 when they really have to start paying war indemnities and reparations. That hadn't happened yet for any of the story. So hyperinflation is out of mind for right now. It's just that the state of the German currency is absolutely terrible, and there's a lot of uncertainty, especially compared to where it was before World War I really went off. So you can see there in that right column, that is the amount of marks that you would need to convert to $1. So 1915 January, basically a few months into the war, it was about 4 marks to $1. Pretty good, pretty stable, and it stays that way into 1916. This is the phase of the war where Germany was seen to be, victorious. Not totally, but it seems to have been on very favorable footing. You get to 1917, and things start to go a little bit bad. Now you're up to about 5.5 from 4. And then obviously we don't have 1918's numbers because that was when the U.S. and Germany were at war. Not a lot of marks were converted to dollars at that point in time, which is also why we don't see the conversions for the pound for most of those years. Obviously, because Germany and Britain were at war. Skip to 1920 though, back when you could start converting marks and dollars again, and you're up to 100 marks per dollar. Which eventually stabilizes a few months after, down to 40 again. But that's still 10 times at its most stable before the eventual currency reissuance in the 1923, I believe, or 24. That's still 10 times weaker than you were before the war started in terms of your currency.
Yeah, so we don't call it hyperinflation because hyperinflation is, I guess it's kind of two things, right, Ryan? It's a larger multiplier than this, but also it's
right.
It's getting worse and worse. That's the thing with
at
the hyperinflation.
Right, and it's at such a rate that you can basically only conclude no one wants the currency.
Yeah, right.
So
everyone's
the fact that
the flight. Mises calls it the flight to real goods. We're trying to get out. If you've got currency, you want to change it into something that you can hold in your hands, basically, because currency is slipping. The value of the currency is just slipping away every day.
Right. So the fact that we even see like a stabilization here for a couple of months down from 100 to 40, this isn't hyperinflation. This is really bad, but it's not unsalvageable,
Right.
or so it would seem on the ground. So this is the currency. It's weak. It's been absolutely destroyed. And there's a little bit more to this that I couldn't just graphically represent on the spot. A quote from the book about the sort of German financial situation. Taxation only covered some 14% of German government expenditures throughout nearly 5 years of war. Instead, the imperial government financed the war through borrowing in the form of war bonds purchased by patriotic citizens, which would be redeemed through huge reparations to be exacted from Germany's defeated opponents. Since even this patriotism failed to match the spiraling cost of the war, the German government simply printed more money, which sent the annual average rate of inflation skyrocketing from 1% in 1890 to 1914 to 32% by the war's end, a figure which did not include the effects of a flourishing black market. And then, as we can see, we see the effects here relative to other currencies. They really did just kind of go through everything they had in order to try to win the war or win a peace. Didn't work. They were left with very little. Their currency was collapsed. They were starving. And then, unless you have anything to add, we can start touching on like the social effects.
All right. So next slide, right? Slide 5.
Yeah. Yes. So, all of this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like today we're on the news. You might hear about this is the worst economic time to ever exist. Things are certainly bad, but we still have businesses open on the streets. We aren't rationing just yet. Prices are higher. Things have been horribly mismanaged, but we are not quite at Germany after World War One levels. And the best way that I can use this once again, excerpt from the book. 1/3 of the country's artisan workshops had disappeared by the end of the war. That is 1/3 of an entire industry evaporated in the span of 4 years.
Wow.
So their proprietors either conscripted or starved of raw materials, voraciously consumed by massive plants which were accorded priority because of efficiencies of scale. So
Mm-hmm.
this isn't even their stuff was going to the war effort. It was the German imperial government would choose usually larger firms that had already existed and had partnered with the state before, and
Right.
they would force resources to go to them because they were thought to be much more efficient. Which obviously, if you were a small shop owner or a small manufacturer or artisan, meant that you basically had to go out of business, either join the farms, join the war, or join those companies.
Yeah.
So,
So the small businessman, or we might even say the kulak, uh,
right,
is the one that takes the hit yet again. This is
yes,
a theme we're noticing.
right, yes, exactly. And then, so this is sort of the this part of the middle class, the shop owner, the people that would be producing things on their own, these would be sort of like the more right-leaning part of the German middle class. Uh, this has just been completely undercut. And then we go on as well. Civil service and white collar salaries stagnated in contrast to the inflated wages of skilled workers in war related industries. And these wages often failed to match rising prices. So even the people that were supposed to be better off than the kulaks weren't doing so well if they weren't in warfare.
Mm-hmm.
So the German monarchy is basically making an enemy out of everyone, even its military. And they aren't really favoring the conservatives either, because, uh, just to quote this, just so no one thinks I'm being hyperbolic, an influx of women into these occupations depressed salaries further. People in jobs regarded as superfluous to the war effort sank into poverty. People regarded as burdensomely unproductive, such as psychiatric patients, died of disease and neglect as they were assigned low priority by wartime triage.
Mm.
So, you know, that's going to anger the Roman Catholics in the population because the government isn't supposed to just drop the poor and also relegate them into complete negligence. Women being pressed in the workforce basically angers everybody in German society that is religious, especially to the extent that women were pressed in the workforce. This was unprecedented. This was something that the Bolsheviks that were just starting to arise in Russia would have been advocating. Not something a German monarchy would be doing. So that's just the kind of situations you're looking at for the ruling class in Germany at the end of this war. And just to underscore that point about women in the workforce really just kind of killing their popularity, um, in a workforce that was becoming radical, rootless, young, and increasingly female, strikes proliferated despite the government's habit of conscripting or imprisoning their ringleaders, a policy pursued too, of course, in wartime Britain, where the number of strikers was significantly greater than in Germany. So
Uh-huh.
this influx of women into the workforce not only served to depress wages, but they were also very prone to strike. They didn't even like the Kaiser and the monarchy as well, or the wartime regime, and they would oftentimes just make life difficult. You also have to keep in mind as well, this isn't like a peacetime strike where it's oh, that sector's gone on strike to get higher wages and it kind of affects you, but it really doesn't. Because in wartime, the government has relegated everyone into a select few industries deemed
Mm.
necessary. So if one of those goes on strike, you are going to be missing something very crucial. Uh, so,
Right.
no one really likes the women in the workforce. The women don't like the government, and the women also don't like their employers. And the employers don't like the women either. They're begrudgingly hiring them. So everyone is angry. There's famine. The currency is collapsing. People are smuggling, and the smugglers are being cracked down on. So even then, people aren't getting food and other materials. The kulaks have been absolutely destroyed. This is where we are. This is all of Germany, basically. So, if you don't have anything to add, the next slide should be pretty quick and punchy.
There we go. Dead morals.
Yeah, yeah. So, I didn't include much for this just because everyone has heard the story of Weimar and the early German Republic by now. But all of the stories that we usually hear from Weimar happened in the middle of it. Later in the 20s, earlier in the 30s. This is early on. And this is even towards the end of the war. We have a lot of journal entries from German soldiers, German civilians, German workers, where they are just commenting on the absolute destruction of moral society. Pastors, priests as well, are quite famous for this. This is why most of them would end up either joining the NSDAP or the DNVP, because these were the parties that promised to sort of restore the pre-war social fabric, not the order, but just telling people that we are going to have normalcy again. Um, so, just a quote here,
Did you use the
because
word degeneracy yet? I can't remember. Anyway,
well,
but that's what
I
we're
will
talking
soon because
about. We're
right,
talking about a moral.
I
What does degeneracy mean? It means a moral degeneration, like you were at a certain level of moral expectation of people's moral behavior, and now
right
you slide down away from that for
the
various reasons. Right.
right that book that I mentioned at the beginning summarizes this by saying the German moralists discerned increases in crime, divorce, incivility, so antisocial behavior, unbridled sexuality, venereal diseases, and the numbers of fatherless young people with too much time and money on their hands. So, housing shortages resulting from the abatement of inessential construction, made for cramped living conditions, and an absence of either privacy or shame. The war also contributed to what one observer called, quote, a moratorium on morality and personal conduct, it being both necessary and legitimate to get along by any means, no matter how underhanded. So, uh, I don't need to describe in detail why the Weimar Republic and its early predecessors in the very early stages were degenerate. But this is society right at the end of the war while it was still going on. So it's not like the policies brought this into being. A lot of this just happened because society was absolutely decivilized during the duration of the war. Um, you also had, those women in the workforce as well would usually also be prostitutes because that's an extra income stream to bring back home. Basically, every degenerate activity that you can think of that you would later see in the Weimar Republic came about during the end of the war, just because that was uh, what people thought were in their best interest for survival or for having a more comfortable life during the wartime measures. Uh,
Right.
and of course, the largest party in Germany at this point in time would have been the Social Democrats, which had split between two factions. One was in favor of the war, and one was in favor of peace for a German socialist country. They viewed the war as an obstruction of that. The majority faction of the Social Democrats didn't really have much restriction of this degeneracy. Sometimes they viewed it to their favor. Obviously, a lot of their older leaders thought it was absolutely insane, but they didn't really do much about it for various reasons. So there's also just the government's no longer enforcing its laws. So that's what's happening in the social sphere.
Yeah.
That's your backstory.
Yeah, a couple quick comments, which is that one of the things I learned at the Mises Institute is that, along with anything else you might say about war and inflation, they both undermine. Uh, Maybe civil society isn't such a great term to use, but
Proper society.
yeah, proper sort of morally functioning, more traditional society gets undermined by inflation. It gets undermined by war. We see this extremely consistently. Also, Paul Cantor, and imagine this, he
Hmm.
was a Shakespearean scholar who
Uh-huh.
not only knew Austrian economics, but in his particular case, studied directly from Ludwig von Mises,
Right.
when Mises came to America. Um, anyway, I remember, gave a lecture on Thomas Mann's 1924 novel, very important, the timing there, called The Magic Mountain, where he said it really is highlighting the moral degeneration, the effects of inflation. He's writing about what he's seeing in that post World War I period there in Germany.
Right.
Um, so there's some literary documentation of all of this decadence and everything.
Right. I remember when AA did his Weimar stream with Charlemagne, I was originally told that I was going to be a part of it, so I had prepared a bunch of excerpts about just the examples of degeneracy in the Weimar Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was up to about like 6 or so pages of just examples, and then I was told at the end I wasn't going to be on.
Oh no.
but these are the conditions that would eventually lead to the Weimar Republic basically, you know, in effect legalizing abortion, having transgender clinics, having brothels everywhere, having strip clubs and whatnot as well. And what used to be an extremely conservative country religiously,
Yeah.
these are the conditions that will allow this to just completely collapse in the span of not even a decade.
Right, and
So,
we're jumping ahead a bit with some of this, but also worth mentioning that, surprise, surprise, children's innocence started to be violated
right,
during this period. So
right.
anyway,
So, on to our very specific topic of Bavaria. So that's
right,
that's all of Germany, everything that we've just described. It
yeah,
applies to Bavaria as well in some major capacity or another. So,
okay. Slide 7.
7, yes. So we have two people here. The one on the left is going to be the last king of Bavaria. I believe that would be Ludwig III, Wittelsbach. He was deposed in 1918 because at this point in time, regardless of how good the monarchs were of the states inside of Germany, because Germany did not just have the Kaiser at its head, it also had kings of Württemberg, Bavaria, Saxony, and I believe that was it. I think there's just the 4, but I could be wrong. Bavaria quite famously had its own monarchy forever. The Wittelsbach dynasty, they were very influential. This comes to an end in 1918. The Social Democrats in Bavaria lead a left wing coup and depose him. And I believe that the story is he was outside of his home. If I remember correctly, if this is the correct story, he was outside of his home. He was on like a walk or a stroll, or he's for an outing or something like that. He comes back and his servants have all gone. The manor is empty. There's no lights on, and that's his deposition. He's deposed.
Wow.
So Bavaria at this point becomes a republic, and it is led by an independent social democrat. These were the anti-war social democrats that split from the majority social democrats, anti-war because they viewed it as an obstruction to achieving a true socialism in Germany. The gentleman on the right was this independent social democrat, Kurt Eisner. So the Bavarian Republic is now established. They're the Bavarian Council Republic, or People's Republic. I forget what the full official name was, but they have a parliament. It has right-wing parties, it has center parties, it has left-wing parties, and it has communists as well. You have to keep in mind the NSDAP and any of its coalition members did not exist yet. So,
Right.
communists were there. They were organizing. The Bolshevik Revolution was happening. There was no reaction to it yet because most of these communists have yet to do anything to provoke that reaction. So,
in regards to Eisner, I just want to name the J here. He was a journalist.
A Berlin journalist as well.
He had been a Berlin journalist. Yeah.
God, you terrified me there for a second, but yeah. So, if not so subtle. If any of you want to go check early lives on any of these members or associates that we are going to mention, I welcome you. I would like to get a running tally. I bet it's going to be in the double digits by the end of this. Also worth noting, that independent social democrat, that socialism they are looking for, it's not just some vague thing to justify power. They had specifically narrowed it down between the sort of reformist faction of the Social Democrats and between the Bolsheviks. So they're not as hardline as the Bolsheviks. They are not as reformist as the SDP. So they are willing to pervert and subvert things, but not through as extreme measures as Lenin. So that's Eisner there on the right. That's what he believes in. So that just happened in Bavaria. Um, in the next slide, we can discuss, because this is going to be very relevant to the end of the story, what's happening in the rest of Germany. Basically,
Okay,
there's a
slide 8, Alliance
yes,
of Convenience.
yes. There is a sailors' revolt in Kiel. Basically, the German Navy had always been lefty, very anti-monarchical in some cases. They had revolted when it was rumored they were going to have to give a one last shot against the British Navy. This later spread into the rest of Germany, with various other factions and events happening at the same time, unrelated, but working towards the same goal. The Kaiser was deposed, and a republic was proclaimed, which can be seen as a historical oddity. Because the Social Democrats, the largest and most organized force in Germany at this time politically, were not anti monarchical. And in fact, many of them were either monarchists or supported some form of the German monarchy, or were indifferent. But either way, we get a German republic. That's not the topic of the show. Is why did the monarchy get abolished? So the vast majority of these people, though, hated the ruling dynasty of Germany at the time. So the Kaiser resigning was a breath of fresh air for them. Some were sympathetic to the next in line. Some just wanted a king in Germany to take the throne, but didn't happen, didn't materialize. We got a German republic, and after an interim chancellor, it is going to be led by the guy on the right, Friedrich Ebert. And he was supposedly, he begrudgingly accepted the position as sort of like the first chancellor of the German Republic. But if you look at some of his actions later, I think that might be a very favorable retelling of his personality. He seemed to have been very able and apt to use power. Ebert was a.
Okay, yeah, I just want to jump in after you talk about him.
Yeah, so Ebert, he was the leader of the majority Social Democrats, the ones that were pro-war. They were the reformists. So he had basically been involved or implicated in a lot of the things that had happened in the war, but that's about to get expunged now because he's about to take over the fresh new republic. So.
Yeah, Martin Webb asked a question. I think you must have mentioned the conservatives were somehow in this alliance of convenience.
No.
No? Oh, okay. Because
no.
He says, what conservative gets rid of the aristocracy and monarchy?
I don't know, because I haven't mentioned the conservatives. They don't really.
I don't know. Okay, sorry. I thought somebody celebrating the end of monarchy was touting themselves as a conservative.
No.
I admit that.
Well,
that would be worthy of some explanation.
I'm sure there were, because a lot of the German right at this point in time saw the monarchy as defunct or inept or even malicious towards the Germans. Okay. But yeah,
right.
I didn't mention them.
So it wouldn't mean if there were any sort of conservatives or whatever in Germany who were against the continuation of that monarchy, it might not be that they were against monarchy in principle. They just were against this particular set of rulers who they thought were not good for Germany.
There was a sizable portion of the German right that just became anti-monarchical as a result of World War One. That's why the NSDAP quite famously was extremely anti-monarchical, is because that was what they came out of, was that anti-monarchy German right.
So they were bitter over how the monarchy had run the war, basically.
Run the war and then run the lead up to the war.
Right, got it.
Because there were, so either way, they aren't a factor here. They don't really shape much of the German Republic at its foundation. Ebert and his friends will be in control of the government for a long time. The SDP will be running the early Weimar Republic. They will be turning places like Prussia, not just the cities, but Prussia, into a social democratic stronghold, down from a very conservative and militaristic stronghold that was very aristocratic. They will democratize the school systems, the universities, all that, just for some idea of what they're going to be doing. But that's not entirely relevant to the story, just tangential. Ebert has a very, very insecure position at his outset. But then he gets an offer from the quartermaster general of the Imperial German Army, Wilhelm Groener, who's on the left there. And he basically tells Ebert that he will support the Social Democratic Republic as long as they keep the authority of the traditional officer corps intact. Because a lot of these revolutionaries and Republicans and anti-monarchists were starting to tear off their German insignia. There was a lot of fear that they would start turning against the officers and then anyone else and just start becoming Bolsheviks. So Groener basically just told Ebert and the rest of the Social Democratic government, if you guys can basically ally with us informally and make sure that we keep our munitions and soldiers and standing and pay and guarantees and all this other stuff, we will support you. So Ebert had basically just had this gift of the loyalty of the army thrown into his lap, and this will make sure that he cements the rule of the German Republic. Germany won't collapse. It will be firmly under the strong grip of the Social Democrats for most of its Republican phase, and it also means that a few of the events that we're going to see in Bavaria will go probably differently than they otherwise would have. It's also worth noting that Groener is going to be heavily involved in demobilizing a lot of the conscripts that got pressed into the war later. Not the people that were in the war already or that were conscripted early on, just the newer ones that had joined near the end. A lot of the German army that had demilitarized as a result of the peace treaty and the truce and all this other stuff, the vast majority of it was a logistical nightmare. And how do you get all these people from the front lines in Ukraine or Lithuania or France back to wherever their home is?
I see. So it wasn't that they were not wanting to come back. It was just literally the logistics of getting them back without them starving on the way and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's part of it. But they're
in the context of just complete collapse, basically, of the
right.
of the political structure in Germany at the end of the war, right?
Right, but there is going to be a group that did not want to go back,
right,
and in fact, they would stay fighting well into the 20s, especially in the Baltic, the Freikorps or the Free Corps. The volunteer army, basically, it was made up of the remnants of this demobilized army, just because the government can do a lot with the military, but they can't really tell the military to hand in all of their weapons and go back home and all of this for the half of them. So the Freikorps is a thing, and it's largely independent from the government. But just to summarize, there is now an alliance between the Social Democrats and trade unions and the German military, the vast majority of which now became Social Democrats. So that's what Germany is looking like. Just so Bavaria is a republic now. Germany's military just became a great ally with the Social Democrats. And the Freikorps is now also an existing thing. So, in the next slide, slide 9,
with 20 minutes to go. Here we go.
Yeah, we got this. So, this is going to be very quick here because things start to it devolves very quickly in Bavaria.
Right.
So,
slide 9, Munich. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this new Bavarian Republic was centered very heavily in Munich. It's the very famous large Bavarian capital. And the writer of the book, paraphrasing quite a few journals that were around at this point in time, 1918 Munich, says, and I quote, Munich was an island of anarchic bohemianism and political radicalism in an otherwise predominantly Roman Catholic rural area of small towns and timber houses scattered across the foothills of the Alps. So,
was this a bit? I visited Munchen, by the way, Munich, and I enjoyed it. Is this like a major urban versus rural split here, where the political radicalism and all that is in Munich, and then the surrounding areas are just country folks?
Yes.
on the
Or well, it's
farms, right?
specifically Roman Catholic country
Yeah,
folks. This is
Catholic
the
country folks.
yeah, yeah. So this is all the narratives that we say about how degenerate Berlin was in the Weimar era. Munich, right now, at the very beginning in Bavaria, is the equivalent, or even the progenitor. You know, this is happening right now, 1918, 1919. Munich is already seen as a degenerate hellhole.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Wow.
so,
So I'm sorry,
uh,
you're saying that Munich might have been actually ahead of Berlin on the
well,
race
specifically, it was.
to degeneracy.
Yeah. They
Okay, okay.
attracted a lot of the sort of avant-garde communistic playwrights and authors,
Mm-hmm.
degenerates, pedophiles, those types.
Yeah.
Uh, they were all congregating here. The Republic, especially, was quite friendly towards them, which will be important very soon. But just to characterize what was going on, we can't really talk much about that early Republic that was founded by Eisner, because he was shot after 100 days in power.
Mm-hmm.
So 100 days in power in Bavaria right after the war ended is just enough to kind of make sure the country doesn't collapse, kind of get the form of government stabilized, get people to show up for a couple of sessions, um, get the military back home, start figuring out a budget, and then he gets shot.
Wow.
Um, so this plunges Bavaria into chaos. Uh, Eisner specifically was assassinated by a gentleman named Count Anton Arco Valley, and there's a much longer name, but that's how it's usually printed in most books that I came across. Uh, Eisner was going to the state parliament to offer his resignation, ironically, because his party had just lost an election and he was shot. So, he was I guess rather impolitely told to resign from life, but that's neither here nor there. Um, he before this why was he shot? He had published a bunch of very unpopular documents from the war era and German diplomacy. It was seen as very unpopular. A lot of his party and members got implicated in the scandal. So the right wing no longer supported him. The left was going much more radical. The sort of degenerate elements were pushing everyone much farther to the left. He gets shot. No one misses him, and now Bavaria is in chaos. And you know, with that, unless you have anything to add, we're on to slide 10.
All right.
Uh,
Chaos. There we go. Okay.
yeah, so that gentleman on the right and his very dashing military look, that is the Count Anton that shot Eisner, the Social Democrat. Uh, yeah, probably very proud of himself.
I'm
Uh,
sorry. He's the count who shot Eisner on the right. Okay.
Yes. So that's the guy on the right. So what happens now? Eisner's party had lost an election. Eisner died. He was basically one of the few people keeping his coalition together, what remained of it, being as he was the one that led the coup or was seen as the leader of the coup. There's what happens now. Your leader, the guy that just started this whole operation, got shot 100 days after starting it. So what happens is revolutionary workers' councils, not Bolshevik. This is the other socialists. They're basically going to start shooting other softer socialist members. Um, Erhard Auer, a majority social democrat leader in opposition to Eisner, he would be shot, I believe, also in the parliament, and also a delegate from the centrist party, the center party, would be shot as well. So multiple
Wow.
politicians are dying, uh, which are at the very least, or Erhard Auer, I can't quite pronounce that last name. He is also depicted in the slide. So this is none of this is going well. So the government actually flees under the majority social democratic leader Johannes Hoffmann. They withdraw to Bamberg, and basically the anarchists and the bohemians and the communists take control of Munich. And this is where we really start the Bavarian socialist experiment. They're not quite yet
Gotcha.
Soviet, because we're kind of with the weird communists that are more anarchistic, much more degenerate. They might even be called lumpenproletariat by the Bolsheviks. So uh, that brings us to the
This
next
sounds like
slide.
that. What was that? Zone in Seattle or whatever.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
occupied what was it? The city block that was occupied. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like they had a little bout of something like that.
Right. Except, so that the government flees north, if I remember correctly. These guys don't just stay in Munich; they actually have support from they organized very well in the
Hmm.
beginning.
Hmm.
Um, they had support south in the south of the country, or at least that's where they nominally maintained control. The legitimate government, the democratic one, fled northward. So now Bavaria, after abolishing its monarchy, has split into two. Socialists have taken control of its historic capital. Degenerates are in control. Um, multiple politicians have just been shot in rapid succession, going
Wow.
really well for the anti-democrats or the anti-monarchists. That guy in the picture of the slide, the lowest of society, of slide number 11.
Oh, sorry. Let me
Uh,
switch that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the guy that takes control, and I will tell you at the end how long he was in control for after telling you everything he implemented. So this guy is named Ernst Toller. Um, he did really well at picking his friends for government. He only picked one clinically insane official, which was his foreign minister. Quite famously, this is so famous you can even find it in the Wikipedia article. He cabled Lenin, complaining that the democratic government, when it fled north to Bamberg, had taken the keys to the government building's laboratory. So he told that to Lenin. He boasted to multiple people in public that he knew the Pope. I believe that would be Pope Benedict XV at this point in time. Um, and he cabled him as well, complaining about the Swiss because he's the foreign minister, this actually clinically insane guy who had been admitted several times to a psychiatric ward. He had demanded of the Swiss to hand over 60 locomotives to the Bavarian Republic to help fight off starvation. The Swiss obviously said no. Then he declared war on Switzerland, and he also messaged the Pope and basically told him how terrible the Swiss were. Uh, Switzerland did not take seriously the declaration of war for obvious reasons, but for all intents and purposes, there's a war declaration. They're at war with Switzerland, basically a couple of days in to Ernst Toller's government.
I
So
like the exact words from the book that I see in the notes here, Brian. Of these men, only the new foreign minister was clinically insane. So that's not too bad, right? I mean, just one out of however many ministers.
right, yeah. So Ernst Toller had a very shaky grip on power because he had opposition from his left, from the Bolsheviks. He had opposition from everyone to his right. It was literally only him and his friends that had power now. Basically because they were the only ones there at the time of seizing power. So they, in the first few days, they socialized the press. They socialized the mining industry, trying to make sure they maintain their grip on power. If you control the narrative at this point in time, control people's information, and also control their resources, pretty solid strategy to make sure you keep power. They forced an 8-hour workday to gain popularity. They also limited bank withdrawals to 100 marks per day to try to stabilize the collapsing financial sector of Bavaria. They instituted rent control to try to win over their lower classes. Uh, and that foreign minister, as I mentioned, or as you mentioned as well, the clinically insane one, his name was Dr. Franz Lipp. Can't find any photographs of him or really any other information. He seems to have died in obscurity after doing this hilarious incident of messaging the Pope and Lenin and declaring war on Switzerland, which is more than most people, definitely in the stream or audience will end up doing in their lifetime, at the very least. Guy did a lot. He also, Toller, in work with the foreign minister, also declared war on a part of Germany, Württemberg. This was also not taken seriously because they were already fighting their opposition government in the north. But this was meant to be serious. It wasn't even taken seriously. Um, and then among the other lower positions, the the chief minister of police in Munich was a convicted burglar. Various other people were also criminals that were appointed to these bureaucratic positions, similar in rank to the chief of police, just in other fields. And the University of Munich was forbidden from teaching history because it was deemed hostile to the new socialist civilization. So, uh, I don't quite know what you do with an admission like that, but history is now banned, is deemed anti-socialistic. Burglars are running Bavaria. The 8-hour workday, rent control, socializing of mining and the press. All of this happened in a grand total of, I believe, 6 days.
Wow.
Uh, and that's all it takes for Toller and his government to get deposed by the Bolsheviks.
Right.
So, and in the next slide, basically,
I had not heard, by the way, well, maybe Cambodia, but I'm not sure I'd heard about them just getting rid of history altogether. That's interesting. Okay,
well,
yeah.
yeah,
Slide, oh, wait. Slide 12, the Bolsheviks.
yes. So, Ernst Toller gets deposed by a gentleman on the right, whose name, you're going to get a lot of people posting some pretty potentially incriminating stuff in your chat here. His name was Eugen Levin. You can do your early life checks if you want to. He was a hardcore Bolshevik. He was friends with Lenin. Lenin, in one of his addresses in Red Square, had given him his blessing because up until this point in time, the Bolsheviks opposed the socialists in Bavaria because they did not think it was strategically sound. They said that Bavaria was not ready for a revolution. The Soviets weren't ready to help. It would just collapse in on itself. But it happened anyways. So the Bolsheviks just kind of worked with it. Lenin gave his blessing to Levin, and Levin eventually just seized power with the much more superiorly organized Bolsheviks. So at this point in time, this scares the hell out of the rest of the world. Because now not only do you have a winning Bolshevik Russia in the former Russian Empire, and also a potential Hungarian Soviet Republic as well that's happening in concurrence with this, but now part of Germany has just declared itself a Soviet Republic in direct friends with Lenin, and also talking about integrating its government with Moscow.
Yeah, and let's just get the timeline right here. So Red October, right? So that's 1917. So late 1917. That the Russian what?
Oh yeah, the Russian Revolution starts late
Russian
1917.
Revolution, 1917, yeah. Right? I guess Bolsheviks are firmly in power by early 1918. I actually don't know that timeline as well as I should.
Late 1918, early 1919.
Oh, late 1918 is when the Bolsheviks really are in power.
Right, because that's about where we are in the timeline right now.
So this is happening after, but not too long after Lenin is firmly in power firmly in power. They're in the middle of a civil war. But anyway.
But yeah, it's basically at this point.
Lenin is, or the Bolsheviks have gotten into power in Russia. And then you're saying around that same time, shortly after, is when this Bavarian Soviet is established?
Well, so the Bavarian Soviet would be established, I believe, early in 1919.
Okay.
So yeah, we're basically
we're talking months though. We're not even talking a year later that Bavarian Soviet Republic is established.
Right. So all of this is happening very quickly.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. I mean, even
that last slide was 6 days.
Right. Even by today's standards, you hear about, Russia's gone communist, and then a couple months later, Bavaria's gone communist. You'd start to feel like you'd start to notice a pattern that would freak you out.
Right. And also, Hungary has gone communist. That's another thing that's happened.
Which we've discussed.
Yeah. And the big issue is that if Bavaria and Russia can connect, there's going to be big trouble for anyone that doesn't like communism, because now you have basically to connect Bavaria to Russia, that means that Germany and Poland both have to fall under Bolshevism.
Mm-hmm.
Once that happens, you basically have the combined might of the former Russian Empire plus the industrialized Germany, and potentially parts of the Austrian Empire that will just be in one league of Bolshevism. It's going to be very difficult for anyone to stop if they decide they don't like your country or your way of life or your people.
I'm not a geopolitics guy, but I am told by people who are geopol guys that control of that center part of kind of Central Europe, right? Germany, Poland, sort of like right in the middle there of Western Europe, is usually considered pretty strategic, right?
Well, yeah, not at the very least because it's some of the more industrialized and richest
Right,
parts, either
right.
by farmland or industry.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, so that's the threat here. Just and that's the news has just been received. We haven't even told anyone what Levine is doing. Um, so Levine is a very good Bolshevik. He forms a Red Army. He starts conscripting factory workers. He starts impressing factory workers into the Bolshevik Party. Um, he starts seizing money. He starts seizing weapons and giving them to the party. He starts conscripting the homeless and putting them into factories where the Red Army, uh, new Red Army soldiers were taken from. So this is what's going on here. They start going on an iconoclastic rampage. They destroy churches. They convert certain churches into barracks and public housing and all this other stuff, basically secularizing the churches into whatever the Soviet government needs at this point in time. And Levine goes a little bit farther than most other Bolsheviks and kind of harkens back to the French Revolution. One of those churches that he sort of secularizes and iconoclasizes, um, he dedicates to the goddess of reason. And if you know your French Revolution history, the cult of reason turns into the cult of the goddess of reason, the goddess of wisdom, very quickly. So this is no accident. Basically, every Bolshevik at this point in time were fanboys of the most Jacobinistic uh, uh, eras of the French Revolution.
Right.
So, this he is directly telling people not only is he a Bolshevik in Bavaria, in Roman Catholic Bavaria, but he's also just willing to reenact the French Revolution. He dedicates a church to the goddess of reason.
Right.
So,
And as we've covered in the series, the most radical parts of the French Revolution, periods of the French Revolution included, say, killing lots of Catholics and priests and people like that.
right.
Yeah.
So, this is what's happening. Most of this happens in the span, if I remember correctly, of about a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
So he acts pretty quickly. He keeps the Soviet Republic going. At this point in time, he's still just basically fighting with the opposition government. The rest of Germany hasn't looked on, mostly because there are other left-wing violence incidents and revolutions in Germany as well right now. The Spartacist uprising, for instance, would be happening early on in this year. So Ebert and the German army have their attention elsewhere. Levine is trying to secure Bavaria in hopes that if he can get a set Soviet government in Bavaria, he can keep it. He starts drafting plans to not just seize money but to abolish it altogether. He tries to design a Bolshevik education system. He tries to emancipate women. He starts executing priests. All of these radical changes very quickly happening. Basically, what happens is with all the changes happening, the opposition government in Bamberg, basically, the leader goes to Berlin to just talk to Ebert and tells him that there is an actual Bolshevik in Munich in league with Lenin that is threatening to take over the country. So Ebert sends part of the German army to Bamberg and then later Munich. And he also basically sends out an open invitation to the Freikorps, basically saying, if you guys want to go put down Munich, we won't stop you.
Wow.
So that's this Red Army is now going to have to face up against the German army, the Freikorps, the peasantry in the countryside, the government that they kicked out and didn't finish off. It's not looking good, and that will bring us to our last slide, where if you are a historical or a political realist, you would know this is not going to last. Levine has no friends. He's in a tiny sliver of Germany compared to the rest of it that is now united against him, not including other Western powers. His own population hates him, does not buy into Bolshevism, so there's no political formula that the population is willing to go along with. And even then, the population, though being split between democracy and traditionalism, they are most avowedly anti-Bolsheviks. So he doesn't even have like a real power base to draw from.
Mm-hmm.
So um, this will basically end with the Freikorps storming Munich. Early on, I believe in April, or not early in April, I believe it would be the 18th of April. Um, the Bavarian Soviets,
Wait, I'm sorry. Which I'm getting lost on time there. So
yeah,
April what year?
April 1919.
1919, and this is he's taken over when?
If I remember correctly, I believe he takes over a couple of months beforehand.
Wait, I thought it went on for about a year.
Well, yeah, we started in 1918 with the Democratic Revolution.
Oh, okay, but Levine isn't in power for a year.
No, 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 no.
Okay,
But
gotcha,
like,
gotcha.
you know,
Okay, sorry.
literally, this whole story has been we started with slightly less left wingers, and now we have ended up with
Right.
Bolsheviks.
With
We have had
Bolsheviks.
leftist violence for a while now.
Right, and okay, but then the Levine administration or whatever is there for
Right.
a
So
couple months
he's
or something.
right. He's going to fight off these armies for a few months
Okay,
because
I see.
he manages to mobilize, I think, about 40,000 troops,
Oh wow.
which is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for just suddenly being thrown into power. Um, the Freikorps originally starts with, I believe, about 9,000. So even though the Freikorps is much more experienced, they have better equipment, they have better reserves to draw from. There's not much that 9,000 men can do against 40,000.
Mm-hmm.
You can win some engagements, but you're not going to be able to just storm Bavaria. So uh, uh, Levine wins, sorry, quite a few engagements. Um, but the Freikorps and the German army are going to send in much more men than the Bavarian Bolsheviks can muster. And every man that the Bavarian Soviet loses is irreplaceable. The Freikorps and the
Mm-hmm.
German army can draw upon who knows how many people and equipment. So it's not looking good. But the Bolsheviks do not surrender. And fighting will keep going on until later into May. I
Mm-hmm.
believe sort of like the first couple of weeks into May. Um, and basically, just to summarize it very quickly, since we're running out of time, uh, they'll push into towns. Fighting will happen. Probably 100 or so people will die. Uh, Usually leftists that have decided that it is better to you know charge the Freikorps to
Mm-hmm.
keep up this degeneracy.
Right.
And most of these Red Guards as well would that's one group. The other group is you've been conscripted into this. You'll be
Mm-hmm.
shot if you turn around into the other direction, and you
Right.
didn't even want to be here in the first place, so you're going to die anyways for the
Hmm.
Bavarian Soviet. So,
Yeah.
um, towns will get taken, people will die. They march on to the next town. Not as much damage as World War One. They're not trying to level Bavaria.
Right.
Um, and as they get closer to Munich, more and more representatives and leaders will get captured, which just further hurts the cohesion of the Soviet Republic. And then finally, in August, between basically in August is when this officially ends, but fighting is basically over by the end of May.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of it, there's been about I think it's about 1,500 people have died by the Soviet Republic, not including the other governments. Um, most of them conscripts. Levine would be okay. Most of Levine's friends would be shot by the Freikorps, which is what
Mm-hmm.
this picture is on the slideshow there.
So it's not necessarily
Um,
Levine, but it's someone from his
no,
group. Yeah.
correct. In fact, if I remember correctly, Levine, I think, escapes for quite a while. But then he is eventually shot in June, if I remember
Mm-hmm.
correctly, because he's captured but not immediately executed like a lot of his friends. So, um, he dies, all of his friends die, the conscripts die, the Roman Catholic factory workers from most of Bavaria that had nothing to do with Soviet ideology. They
Right.
will die as well because if you're in the Freikorps and there's open conflict, it doesn't matter what the intentions of the other side are. If they have the red uniform on, you have to kill them.
Mm.
So that's the all of this brought about by the by the sort of leftist coup that deposed the Wittelsbachs. So this is how it ends. There's a constitution that later gets adopted after the Freikorps restores order. Bavaria officially becomes a free state, a republic, and that's the end of the story, basically. Then you're on to Weimar. So, you know, over 1,000 people died. And just a quote from Levine to show how he was governing the country during that
Mm-hmm.
time when he was in power. Um, there were milk shortages in Bavaria, and Levine had this to say: "What does it matter? Most of it goes to the children of the bourgeoisie anyway. We are not interested in keeping them alive. No harm if they die. They'd only grow into enemies of the proletariat." So,
Wow.
yeah, that's Levine on milk shortages in Bavaria. He is willing to kill as many children, literally willing to kill as many children as possible in order to get his Soviet Republic. So that's how this was being governed during that time. If you didn't get the impression from the actions he was taking, very in line with Lenin. So, Bavaria goes on in the Weimar Republic to basically eschew most forms of leftism, and will remain a very right wing state, not NSDAP right wing, but
Mm-hmm.
they there's a reason that Bavaria is a conservative stronghold for most of the republic, and it's because they had to go
Mm-hmm.
through three socialistic governments that
Right.
caused untold amounts of terror. And this
Right.
is the other thing as well. There wasn't as much violence here as you would see in some of the other episodes, though over 1,000 people is a lot. A lot of the terror just comes from the absolute insanity of the people running you,
Right.
because we went from Eisner at the beginning, the social democrat, who you know might not have been insane, but he deposed basically a multiple centuries old dynasty and couldn't keep the republic together, lost an election, and then got shot because of his unpopularity. Um, then Toller and the degenerates take over, and we get that episode that we described with having psychiatric patients and criminals run the country,
Right.
while he's basically banning history and all this other fanciful stuff. And then we get a Bolshevik that is, basically telling peasants, I am willing to have milk shortages for your children because people that are richer than you will die as well from it. So, overall, a short episode. There's not much that happened here. It's almost a year long.
Yeah.
Um, but it is absolutely terrifying, especially if you put yourself as a commoner in Bavaria for
Oh my
this year-long
goodness.
episode.
Just the world turned upside down. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm just so glad that we've, learned all our lessons from the 20th century and know not to let mentally ill people get anywhere near power. I think we're very careful about that now.
Yeah.
Sam153 gives us a tip on Subscribestar. It just says tip for the free core. So
Yeah.
yeah, I never knew about the Freikorps, and I still don't really know that much, but I just
We talked
noticed.
about it on the way to the Mises Institute in March, didn't we?
Okay, yeah, I think that's why I know anything. And I just noticed that when they get brought up, there's seems to be an enthusiastic reaction in our circles. So there you go.
So,
Okay, well I have got to go because I've got to pick up a son from junior college because that's what homeschoolers
well,
do. They start going to picking up classes at junior college while they're still technically in high school. It's a sort of a
right, yeah.
homeschool tradition. Sometimes they will even have a degree by the time they go to college. They already have something. They have like an associate's degree in something or whatever. It's not uncommon. I don't know if that'll happen with my children, but so need to get off to do that. Thank you very much, Ryan, for throwing this together. And I really like it that we brought out an episode. And tell me if you have a different impression. But I would say that most people, way more than most people, would not know anything about Red Bavaria.
Oh, yeah,
They would
definitely
not have
not.
known it had even happened, right? I did not. I
Right.
did not. I'll just confess.
Yeah, usually the story goes they were just magically really right wing in the Weimar Republic and really distrusted communists for some reason. I wonder why that is.
Bavaria
You
was, you're
never.
saying.
Yeah,
Bavaria
yeah,
was right wing during the later, yeah, after that. Throughout,
yeah.
say, the 20s and stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So does that mean that Munich did not continue to be like a center of degeneracy?
I would have to ask an actual like German historian here because
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
where I kind of just stopped researching. But it's my
right.
understanding that when the Freikorps occupy the city and order is restored, that a lot of the degenerates that were with Toller and the later Bolsheviks fled the city to
Hmm.
either other countries, usually Vienna, which is also where you get the Austrian Civil War,
Yeah,
or they fled to Berlin. So
gotcha. Okay.
yeah. And just if anything is low quality or wrong here, in my defense, I made this today. So
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, totally threw this together. Okay. Thanks, everybody. I checked. I think that was all we had to address his tip on subscribe star. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. We should be back with Black Horse. There is a lot of stuff where he's champing at the bit to cover some of the current events going on in the markets. Let's just say quarter 3 of 2022 is one for the books. Um, some
yeah,
big
yeah,
developments for us to discuss next week. And Black Horse has already been chatting with me privately about them. So, well, and if you follow him on Twitter, you'll catch some of what is on his mind as well. But anyway, we'll do that next week. And I don't know how long we'll do the Left Wing Terror series, but I know we're not done until we do Days of Rage. That
yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
that's what inspired me to do the whole series. So we will be doing Days of Rage, which is actually the United States in the 1970s. So
Yep.
have to figure out how much left wing terror we want to fill in between, you know, the Bienio Rosso, uh, Red Bavaria, and jumping to the 1970s. There's probably a little bit in there that we could cover before we bring it up to not present day, but my lifetime. The
Right.
Days of Rage actually happened when I was a young boy, though I didn't know anything about it at the time. um,
Right. And yeah, before everyone just signs out, it is worth mentioning we do have a, book cover competition at the
oh, thank
Discord,
you.
which should be linked in the description. Uh,
Yes,
and usually there is a post-stream chat. Oftentimes I will look in there while I am going about my work after stream, and there will be people chatting either by text or voice. So by all means, join and look
in
at
the
that
Discord. Yeah,
competition.
right. All right. Thank you for that. So many things. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next week.